I'm Chris Wong. I am a composer that works mostly on Vietnamese films. And
Yeah. I'm Weiko Lin. I'm the graduate director of screenwriting at Lola Marymount University, and I'm a writer producer.
Thank you both for coming on. We have so much rooted history between the three of us here, and it all goes back to, I guess, Ham Tran, right?
sort of, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Somewhat.
Waco and
Yeah.
I knew each other before I knew Ham.
Yeah.
Right.
But,
So I knew actually undergraduate, when we're undergrads at UCLA, Hamtran and I were in this playwriting class together in the English department. So we're both English majors and we took this playwriting class together, but we didn't know we were going to film kind of trajectory. And then later on, we went back to grad school at the same time. So he was in UCLA grad film school in production, directing, and I was back at UCLA Film School in screenwriting.
Okay, and just to give everybody a little context of who Ham Tran is, he's a Vietnamese American director who's gone back to Vietnam to make a lot of movies, and he began in the community with a thesis called The Anniversary, which you worked on that soundtrack, right?
yeah, and that's like how Waco and Ham and I are kind of connected, I guess, in some ways, because Waco and I met in 1998, and Waco had written a script for a musical and needed a composer, and I was recommended to him by a mutual friend named Eddie Shu.
Right.
And we just got one meal and got along really well, and we're like, why not? Let's do it, right?
So it was the first musical for both of us.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And then
It was staged at Royce Hall, which is like over 1,000, seating capacity,
yeah.
student production, but it was under guys, by like almost like a culture show, like those different culture shows, but we made it like a full musical production with like $40,000 budget.
Yeah, the reason why we're here today is to talk about the musical that you guys have just released a rough sort of production of it, but we'll save that to the end. But that's
Yeah.
why we're here. But
Yeah.
I want to get to know that whole sort of the lineage and all of the webs that that you guys have gone
Sure.
through with the Vietnamese community and the Asian American community here in LA at large.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So what's interesting is another familiar name that we're all connected to is Jenny Chang Lei, right?
Right.
And she was actually in the cast of that first musical,
right.
that the two of us worked on. Now, Waco and I went on to write another musical at UCLA,
2 years after.
Wow.
and
Yeah.
I think it was around that time, maybe just a little bit after we finished that second musical that Ham was working on, The Anniversary. And
I was just literally, it's all like, talk about sliding doors, right? It was literally, I was at Melnitz Hall where our film school was. I walk by and I see Ham's editing his thesis. And I just popped my head in, hey, like you do as a student, film school. I was like, what are you working on? Oh, I'm doing my thesis. I go, you got a film score? Do you have a composer for your piece? Because I know an extraordinary composer. Because, Chris was studied under Jerry Goldsmith, the late Jerry Goldsmith. So I knew film scoring was actually his backbone. And I roped him into doing the musical, which was a great experience. And I go, he's phenomenal. And then I set them up and off they went.
I want to ask you guys both in the early days, because we all come from sort of like the 90s and dreaming of being in entertainment. What were you guys thinking at that time in terms of opportunity, in terms of representation? Where can you guys paint a picture of that environment in the 90s?
That's very interesting because it was a different time than it is now. Obviously, we're kind of right now, fortunately, going through explosion of Asian content in the mainstream media, and which is great. It's, I guess, what we were dreaming could be back then, but it was not like that back in the 90s, right? There were a lot of filmmakers and creative writers that were making Asian content, but mainstream Hollywood, the big studios and everything, they weren't interested in telling helping us tell our stories.
Yeah, I
like
mean,
like they are now.
Yeah,
right?
I mean,
It
you
was-
see on
it
the
was-
credits from composers to writers, right? You saw no names. I mean, basically nobody was working in
Yeah.
Hollywood.
Yeah, and that didn't mean that we didn't exist. It's that those doors had not been opened to
Opened,
us
yeah.
yet, right? And I think that because I remember making movies with these guys in like Victor Vu's first movie was in 2003, and by the way, the way I connected to him was through Ham Tran.
Yeah. And that's a big
and-
movie, Passport to Love, right?
Yeah,
Was that the one that you worked on, the first one?
Yeah, that was the first one he did
Yeah.
overseas, right? And that was in I want to say 2008. I'm not really sure, but it was back around that time. And Ham made Journey from the Fall, I think around 2005, 6, something
Yeah.
like that. And I just kind of felt like we were this, underground indie filmmaker artist kind of community that we had our own film festivals and etc. But the reality back then is that a major studio was not going to put up something like Shang-Chi or Crazy Rich Asians back in 2003, right?
And what made us think that we could do it? What made us think that we'd have like a long life ahead? Because if you think about it, there was it was non-existent, and for us crazy, there's probably like maybe 100 people at that time. I think if I think about it, maybe 100 Asian American kids that were sort of like thinking about pursuing this path.
Yeah.
What drove you guys to go, I'm just gonna do it?
Well, I have a short answer, and then I want to see what Waiko thinks about this. But my short answer is that I actually think that and this is a gross simplification, but not every Asian filmmaker was working on Asian content. So there were some that decided they wanted to try to make mainstream Hollywood films. Which at the time, what was being greenlit were basically white stories, right? And then there were other Asian filmmakers that I think they just felt like they had to. It almost, I didn't even perceive that it was a choice. It was like they just needed to get their story out there, their personal story about their Asian experience. It never crossed their mind that they would do anything else. They just, felt like they had to make those movies.
Yeah.
And those are what I got involved in. Waiko, what was your perception?
What's interesting, I think the college atmosphere is really fascinating. And you can see the people who were entrepreneurs and creating those things. But I don't think we ever thought that career was tangible. We thought about it. Let's give it a shot. But it wasn't like, yeah, but now I feel like, kids go to film school. That's what we're going for.
Yeah.
I know my target. Like, with internet, know
There's a
exactly
career
what's
path
going on.
now.
There's internet. And it's very all the information that your career path. But back then, for example, Randall Park, he founded LCC, right? An Asian theater company, just like a club, right? Like us, we wanted to do a musical. So we were entrepreneurs in putting this. Chris, our first musical, he put together a 30-piece orchestra. Like, that's insane. And arranged all the music. It's like going, whoa. People are like, whoa, we have a live 30-piece orchestra pins. Like, it was phenomenal, right? Like, but it just shows, like, having the opportunity, we can do it. And I think we did it under the guise of, in a student production, per se. But we made it as pro as we possibly could, going forward. And I think that set the ink, just like Randall Park with LCC and his partners in that, and they went into Hollywood trajectory. But I think you got a taste. You knew how to connect with an audience, and that's not just like, hey, college audience, hey, like show. They actually put together original plays, original musical, like just really flexing their muscles. I think that set the foundation. Like, we can connect with audiences, and I think that set the drive to like, what, maybe we could really do it. And then the next 10, 15 years, right?
Yeah.
After
Yeah.
to fight that fight, to go for it.
There's almost something also, we were all so young back then. We were like 22 or 23 when we, started working together. And it's both about being that age, and also maybe the lack of that kind of diversity in Hollywood at
Yeah.
the time, you almost had to be, you have to be audacious to begin with to try to make movies. But in our situation, we almost even had to be more audacious,
Yeah.
you know, given the reality. It's like, when you're that age, you almost are not worried about failing because no one's told you yet that
Yeah.
you can't do it, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I could tell you the class of people that came from that is Randall Park, like you
Yeah.
said, Hugh Ho, who's his partner, they're producing partners, and Ali Wong. Ali
Yes,
Wong came from
LCC.
From LCC.
Exactly. That time, and that gave you the audience.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. And look at Ali Wong today. She's probably like at the furthest sort of like the edges of mainstream
Beef.
that. Yeah, Beef.
I mean, Emmy winner.
Yep,
Are you
yep.
kidding?
Yeah.
And then that wasn't, and Beef was extraordinary. And I feel like shows like that is a way paving the Asian American voice forward, because we're not just doing the, martial arts, fantasy. I know we've just kind of the conversation, I'm sure, has been had many before, but that was a very non-traditional expectation
Yeah.
of what an Asian American series would be.
Yeah, and so there's you, Waiko, there's you, Chris, Ham came out of that, Jenny Chang Lei, all these people who, when you look at a Beef, you don't realize like that's like 20 something
Yeah.
years in development.
In the making,
Yeah.
right? That set the foundation, and representation is just so important, right?
Yeah.
Back then, the person that gave me thought maybe there's a possibility is Ang Lee, who's Taiwanese person. When I'm Taiwanese, so being able to see like someone can do it. But now you look at this, like professors, So I'm a grad director of screenwriting at LMU. If I went to a school of seeing, wow, there's a person of color or someone who's Asian American being a professor, I was like, whoa, this is real possible. When I went to screenwriting, I got my MFA in screenwriting. I still didn't think you could make a career. I didn't know what it was really. I just enjoyed the writing of it. It was only through taking classes like agents come and producers come, like, oh, you can make money. It was like, oh, this is fun. It's like writing screenplays.
Yeah.
I could watch movies, but it becomes tangible. And I think educators is very critical too. I spend my 20 years, I've taught in various universities in screenwriting.
Yeah, yeah.
I
And
think
you have
that's important.
You have a screenwriting book as well, right?
I have a screenwriting. That's right. Crazy screenwriting secrets. Yes.
Yeah.
By the publisher of Save the Cat.
Yeah,
So.
that's a big deal because I remember going to your book signing at was it Emerson, or is that
Maybe one of those book signing, the Grove. We had the Grove. No, not the books. It was like a school.
It was a school
Okay, that's
thing.
Emerson College. Yeah, I was at Emerson College for 8 years before I went to LMU. Yeah.
Right. Wow. Yeah. So you guys have done a whole lot. Before I go to you, Chris, I want to ask you, Waiko, when you're in these classes and you're teaching today, what's the percentage of Asian American students, and what are
Great question. Now, MFA production programs, they tend to have a lot more Asian American students because it's production, right? But even if you're born here or you grew up here, your command of English is phenomenal, there's still not as many Asian American writers, right? But I can say right now, in my program, I have 2 fantastic Vietnamese American screenwriters.
Oh, really?
MFA, yeah, in my Writing for the Screen program. So I think the 2, maybe I have 3 out of 60 graduate students. Maybe right now I have 3 Asian American writers.
And the follow up to that is because I thought about it when I was, thinking about you today. How much of these students are writing stories that are Asian American themed or Vietnamese themed, and how much of it matters?
Yeah. That's I think is so cool about them. They're, at least the 2 Vietnamese American, they're writing Vietnamese content. They have a desire to work in the Vietnamese film entertainment.
Do they know how closely you're related to the Vietnamese?
I tell them a little bit. I go, but I'm going to connect them to this whole world, soon, because to focus on screenwriting, I think it's very special.
Yeah.
For Asian Americans, it's not as many people. Like, I don't see the numbers going up over the years because production, it's visual, it's craft. But something about the command of the English, like we have novelists, right? Obviously, Pulitzer, from the world, but screenwriters, I feel we could definitely do more.
Yeah.
We can do. It's hard, but I think with training and showing the possibility, and that's kind of a great thing for more people to get into.
Yeah, I think when you think about production, you're always gonna have a job, or it's a lot easier to get a job.
Yeah,
I think with writing, it's a tough path.
It is,
right?
it is. And the blank page, no one likes it. Oscar winners, they look at it, they start a script, the blank page is the worst thing ever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you first started with Ham on the anniversary, Chris, what sort of things did Ham convey to you about this project that was uniquely Vietnamese, but you don't come from that background? So I want to know sort of the origin story of sort of what is he telling you in the early days to put together a soundtrack or the music for this project, but you don't come from that world.
Sure. Well, first of all, I should start off by saying that when he first showed me the rough cut of the film, it completely blew me away. It looked like I was expecting what you would think of as a quote unquote student film or whatever, and this thing looks fully professional, right? And I told him this is the best film out of film school I've ever seen. And and then we really, we didn't talk much about style of music or instrumentation. The score is actually very minimal and transparent because that's what that film needed,
right?
And it does not really use Asian musical language or instruments, but so we didn't really talk about those kinds of things. But what I learned from Ham is a lot of the things that I had no idea about the Vietnam War, and all I really knew, because it's not my heritage, as you mentioned, I'm not Vietnamese American. I'm Chinese American. I just knew what American mainstream culture had given us, which was all those dumb Rambo movies and stuff like that, And I remember Ham explaining to me that the Vietnam War was actually a civil war. I'm like, I'd never heard that before. I'm like, wow, what else? Tell me more. Like, and the anniversary had a complex narrative behind it. It was a nonlinear narrative that all kind of comes together at the end in a very shocking and profound way, right? And so, he explained to me the idea that the Vietnam War being a civil war, it's entirely possible that two brothers from the same family could end up on different sides of it, and something like this could happen, and so and that was just my introduction into this the history of this whole community, because as these filmmakers used to kind of joke around, it's like every one of them had to get their Vietnam War movie out of the way. It's like the first thing they did, right? And then they went on and did different genres, right? But Victor Vu's movie First Morning was kind of a film about Vietnamese communities in America that are adjusting to life after the war.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And then Journey from the Fall, obviously, has depictions of the fall of Saigon and actually takes place in Vietnam and in the United States. And so through all those movies, I just kind of learned more and more about, the Vietnamese American community and what the realities of being a war refugee are. And what's so interesting, I think, is just, we, as Asian Americans, we relate on many levels, right? But then even inside the Asian American community, there are some differences between being Chinese American, being Vietnamese American, and it's amazing how much we have to learn from each other. I think just even though we're all Asian Americans, right? So that I think that the anniversary was the project that kind of first set me down that path about learning about Vietnamese American history. I think, you know.
I want to go back to you, Waco. And I want to ask you too, Chris. When we think about Asian American themes, whether it's story or music or feel, is that something that you think about as you're teaching your students? Is this something that you think about where is it Asian enough? Is it too much Asian? Are these things sort of going on in your minds when you guys are creating or teaching?
Yeah, for sure. I think, what story did exist and what community do you want to tell it and through whose perspective that makes sense, right? I think so often there's two sides of stories like, oh, we have a cast. Why can't it just be Asian? And there's nothing Asian about them. They're just like, that's good. There's representation. You're playing these like roles. And I think that exists. But I also feel like with an Asian character, Asian setting, there's a perspective through it. Like Beef is a great example, right?
Yeah.
It's not just like a bunch of angry, Americans, and that's just what. There's something that I think you get that as an overall, but it's something if you're an Asian audience, you get that a little bit more. Does that make sense? Like you get that a little bit, another layer, just like how Pixar movies, right? You're serving, right? Road rage, okay? Road rage, everyone gets that in America, right? But there's more layers to it. So the Asian American audience is like, oh, there's more. It's just like Pixar movies, right? It's playing to the children, but another level for the adults, we're like, that's another level, right? So I feel like those are the intentions. I feel that going to, if you're going to make that choice, and I think it's important to make those choices. But every writer and storyteller is different about how they want to move forward with that.
And I think that's actually one of the most interesting things that today in our era of Asian American storytelling in 2024, is that there's actually so many different lived experiences of Asian Americans, and sometimes even experiences that seem to be in conflict with each other. You'll see. It's great because you remember when we only had like 2 shows, right? You remember when Fresh Off the Boat came out, and then Crazy Rich Asians, and then there was like this, almost like intense amount of pressure for those shows to be perfect. Right. Because it's like, oh, that's got to represent every Asian person because, because it was like a scarcity thing. Right. But now what we're realizing after, we've gotten all these things produced and, there's so much more content is that we actually have such a diversity of experiences and things that are not so obvious. It's someone being Chinese American and growing up in San Francisco, that's a fairly common story that we're familiar with. But then, I have a friend named Brian who is Chinese American, and he grew up in Oklahoma. And he was like the only Chinese kid in, I don't know, like 100 miles or something, whatever, and that's also an Asian American experience, even though it doesn't get told as much. But I just think that's why, for me, if I were to be talking to an up and coming Asian American writer or music composer or whatever, I would just say, whatever is honestly your life, what you've lived.
It's fair game, right?
Yeah, even if it's not like what you think your typical Asian American is supposed to look like or whatever, if that's what you lived, then that you should tell that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
This is a really wacky question. But I look at us and I think to myself, we are these sort of middle-aged guys, but I mean, 50 is the the new 30, right?
Right.
But
New
what
20s. What are you talking about? New 20s.
if this is such a theoretical question, but if you could go back in time and, like drop yourself and be born in whatever, would you rather be where you are right now or be that young kid sitting in at LMU?
Yeah, right.
Getting
right.
this sort of like this momentum that we all gave that kid, right? But now, like, we look at our lives and we don't have a whole lot left to go. I know we're young guys, but we're not.
What are you talking about?
Right?
40 years in me. What are you talking about?
And so there's like this short runway left, but then I think about that. I'm like, it's great for me. I'm sitting in this chair. I get to capture these stories. But I think as a creator, sometimes I'm like, are we over the hill? Or would you rather be that young student that's like that Asian American student who's like starting out, who is getting his shot, and he's got a long runway with a lot of like lives laid down for him. Yeah.
Right. It's so hard, right? Because our experience. But then now you look back now, I think, there's something about like the years behind us because we can be selective on what we want to do, right? I think back at the, let's say now, the LMU student going through, you kind of take whatever opportunities you have, right?
Yeah.
Just to kind of learn. And now, I'm not sure if I want to go back to that or, even though it's a good movement, right?
Yeah.
Going through, it's fantastic. So the fact that there's a movement doing it, those stories will be told, those audiences will be served. But now I feel we could be selective on what's the meaningful stories, the things like the passion projects that I pursue. I know we'll talk about the musical in a bit, but that's exactly where this came from. It's not a job, right? It's like, a musical theater. It's a long way, going through. But at this place, we feel like this is something important to us that's meaningful.
Right.
And there's a lack of that modern Asian musical, if you will,
Yeah.
right? About the American dream. The American dream, within that. So I feel like then that's worth that. So
Yeah,
I'm not sure if that answered your question.
Yeah,
but
yes, it does.
Yeah, I think I think maybe another way of looking at your question, I don't know if this is what you're saying, but would I have rather grown up in this era with the kinds of opportunities that today offers?
Yeah.
And it's one of those things where I don't know if there's really a way you can say that one opportunity would have been better or worse, because I think I used to think that when I was younger, I think maybe 10, 15 years ago, as I saw that, Randall Park's famous now and things are starting to, what if I had started my career in 2020 or whatever. I used to think that, but the thing is, I don't really have any regrets. Looking back at, I never got to work on any huge Hollywood movies or whatever, but
Yet.
I do
Yet.
want to talk about that though. I do want to talk about that. But can we should segue.
Look at John Williams.
Yeah.
Look at John Williams. He's still going.
Going back to Journey from the Fall, that movie was not like a huge commercial success. It didn't make a ton of money. It wasn't in like 5,000 screens in America or what, but that film is like taught in universities now and stuff like that. And it's actually still very important culturally to a lot of the Vietnamese American community. And, how could you ever regret working on, there are ways to make money, you can always make more money. And I'm very fortunate that, I have what I need. Like I'm not starving, it's, I'm not rich, but I have what I need to live off of, and,
You've done a ton of Vietnamese films. I mean, from The Rebel to Passport to Micah to Journey from the Fall, Mắt Biếc, right?
Yeah.
I could go on and on and on when I sit and I think about the Yellow Flowers, right? There's so many that you've done. Was there ever a time that you had to make a conscious decision to say, well, let me go and intern at a big studio so I can climb up that route, or with a big composer? But it feels like you chose a deliberate path to score and stay within the Vietnamese community.
I don't know if I chose it as much as I feel like it chose me.
Oh, wow.
I don't really know. I mean, it's what I told. I don't know that. Well, first of all, I'm not sure that my personality and the types of things that I like to do are conducive to being starting out as like a fourth assistant in a huge music production studio, and basically working 90 hours a day, trying to work my way up that rat race. But that, and then also what I've told younger creatives who are looking for advice is just always try to do great work with great people. It's just really simple.
Yeah.
Is that,
Yeah.
And as long as you're consistent about that, you're going to end up someplace where you feel grateful for what you're doing, and I think in that respect, I found the people that's
going to make you the John Williams of Vietnam.
I get it. Like, I mean, it was like we said earlier, Waiko walked by an editing room and talked to Ham Tran, and then there's so many of these things you can't really control in terms of what happens to you, or like who ends up calling you, and and of course you can go out there and network all you want, and that it's what they say, increasing your luck, right?
Yeah.
But
as Bao Win says, planned serendipity.
Planned serendipity. Love
but
it.
It's 100 different people could put in that same effort of networking and hard work and everything like that, and their lives would all end up 100 different ways.
Yeah.
Right? In terms of like the types of projects they would end up working on. So. And all that to say is, I don't know that I really consciously chose to do Vietnamese films. I just found a couple of guys I got along with really well when I was younger, and they seemed to like me enough that they wanted me to keep doing it. So, and I enjoyed it enough. I'm like, sure, let's do another one. Yeah,
just so you know. 40 features? How many features have you done?
I think 49 at this point.
49 feature Vietnamese. But just so you know, he has done one Taiwanese film that I produced. So we have one Taiwanese feature. So it's not all Vietnamese.
Directed by Henry Chan.
Henry Chan, who was the principal.
Give him a shout out
who
there.
was actually he was the pioneer. I don't know if you see Henry Chan's name. He was the principal director of Moesha. 80% of the episodes. He directed 200 episodes of primetime television. Pioneer. Like, I remember as a kid growing up, I would see his credit, and then he went on to direct the Taiwanese films, the Chinese American, and he's also helping us workshop our musical as well.
Which film was that, Waiko?
100 Days.
100
You
Days.
can watch on Amazon Prime. So
Yeah.
if you're a nice romance movie.
I love that film. Yeah.
Oh my God, you watched it?
Oh, you seen it?
Yeah. My ex is Taiwanese.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, very cool.
So my children are half
Thanks for
Taiwanese, half
supporting.
Vietnamese.
Oh, interesting. Oh, very cool. Oh,
Yeah,
great.
yeah.
Oh, great.
I've been to Taiwan quite a few times.
I did not know this. Oh, we had to sidebar that later.
Yeah.
Oh my God,
I
really?
love- yeah,
You've been
I
to
love-
Taiwan?
I
Very
love
cool.
Taiwan. Taiwan's such a mellow,
It's so chill.
it's a
It's
chill
so
group
chill.
of people. Yeah, so opposite of Vietnamese people.
Oh, is it? One of the there's very few countries I'm like I really want to go. I really want to go to Vietnam. That's where I really want to go.
You should go
I
because
want
it's
to
just
go.
a hop away from
It is.
Taiwan.
Yeah. I
You
want
know?
to go very bad. I have a cousin who's Taiwanese who's been living in Vietnam for over 10 years, and he works in. Yeah, so definitely knows. And all the Vietnamese American film,
People
folks
that-
out
yeah.
there.
If you get there before I do, that's going to be ironic.
I know, it would
because
be ironic.
I
It would
still
be
haven't gone
ironic.
yet.
It would be ironic.
I'm blaming it on the fact that I've had young children for a long time, so my wife would be angry if I left her with them for
that's
alone
Bring them
for
along.
2. Yeah, but I do need to get out to Vietnam someday.
Before we move on to the musical, I want to ask you, Chris. when you are composing for Vietnamese films, is there, again, it just goes back to that this burning question I have. Is there sort of a mindset that you have to put your sort of spirit in to kind of feel what is going on screen with these Vietnamese people, or is not the case at all?
I mean, yes, because on some level, and let me explain that. It's
Like, how do you make it feel Vietnamese?
yeah, I think it's not for me. It's not a question so much of whether the music itself feels Vietnamese or not. Even though occasionally I'm asked to do that, but it's really what you have to ask yourself is whether the music is hitting the correct emotion, right? And because, look, if you have a scene where, a mother and a child are separated by some horrible circumstance, and she's worried she's never going to get to see her again, that's going to, feel that very similar to a lot of different mothers and children, regardless of what your heritage is, right?
I hear you, but as somebody who just watched Last Wife, right? For example, the music does not take me out of Vietnam. It keeps me there. And how many of you you've done 40 something of these?
Yeah.
The Vietnamese language films. It's like I watched Last Wife and I saw your names pop up in the credit. I'm like, that is strange. And I've been wanting to interview you for so long since I started, right? Because it's always like a weird phenomenon in my head. I'm like, how does he not take me out?
I think here's
That's cool.
here's one answer to that. Is that when what I've learned about the career of being a film composer is, and I think this is probably true for being a film editor or a cinematographer or a film actor, is that you're working as part of a team, and the director is the leader of that team creatively, right? And so obviously you want it to be a artistic collaboration, but your director is leading you. He's he or she has been living with the movie for way longer than you have.
Yeah.
They might have been writing it for years. They may have been living with these characters for and the composer just kind of comes on and works for 6 weeks and adds those finishing touches. And so what I've learned is that just to always trust your director's instincts. If he feels like something didn't quite hit it, didn't quite get the right emotion, then you got to think about, well, what part of the character am I missing? What part of the story am I missing? What didn't I quite see the right way because I'm new to this film, right? And so that's in films in general, but beyond that, working with Vietnamese films with Vietnamese directors, sometimes I really have to trust their instincts. It's like, because they know the audience over there, right?
Yeah.
And they may know the culture over there in ways that I don't. And so if, they're asking me to tilt the music emotionally one way or another from what my first take was or whatever, then it's just like, okay, there's something maybe I don't get about their audience also, or what, how certain things inside the movie would be received and why they would want this a little funnier or a little sadder or whatever,
My God, I can go for miles about this technical side of film scoring with you because, I have questions about, how can directors, Vietnamese directors like Ham or Victor, these guys, explain to you, like, I want a minor here, I want a little bit more major here, right? Like,
no, they don't do that. I encourage them not to be, film directors should never feel like that they have to speak in musical language. They should speak in emotional language, right? So it's like how you're directing an actor or even a cinematographer. I'm guessing like you don't go like, okay, I want this color gradient to, like, you know, you're just like, okay, this scene should feel really, and then the cinematographer interprets emotional content and they start lighting things based on the emotion that you're trying to create, right? And so you do that with music too. The director should never, I always encourage directors not to try to avoid talking about instrumentation or technical language or whatever. It's just like, tell me emotionally how you want this to feel, because if you talk about technical language like major or minor chords or whatever, that's like telling an actor, okay, on this word I want you to touch your nose, and then on this, it's like it'll come out robotic,
literal, too literal.
It's like just feel it, and so that's why if I feel like I'm not quite getting something, it's like, well, tell me emotionally what I'm missing. Why is, oh wait, this character actually feels offended when that character said this because there was that scene 3 scenes ago where I missed this part of the story. And, so that's the kind of direction I need. And then on top of that, their understanding of what it's like to write a Vietnamese story for this Vietnamese audience, how they should feel.
Yeah.
I think that's what's really valuable to me in terms of getting the music right.
Got it.
And then like you're mentioning like The Last Wife, I think there's 1 or 2 traditional songs in there, and Victor had picked those out early, and we had I think Katie's actually singing one of them on screen.
Wow.
Right. And so that always gives you like a starting point. It's like, oh, here's a song that gives me the correct feel that the director wants. It's like, so
you can build out.
Parts of the score should live in that world. It's kind of,
All right, we're going to switch gears over to the musical, but I do want to talk about Ennio Morricone at the end of this song.
Oh, jeez.
I love Ennio Morricone. So do I. Favorite. When I do any work or
Same
just like,
here.
that's a music, I mean, yeah, The Mission and
Cinema
Paradiso.
Paradiso.
That's my go-to.
Milena.
Cinema Paradiso is
I am
best.
a huge fan
Oh
of
my
Ennio
gosh.
Morricone. One time I asked you to write something
similar to one of his.
similar.
It's like, how do you beat that? There's no way, right?
I was like, Chris, can you make something for this commercial right here? Yeah,
I think I remember that actually.
yeah, but you pulled it off. It was great. It was awesome. And when I think about Ennio Morricone, I think about like, you can't put Ennio Morricone into Vietnam and do 40-something films, right? And he's an Italian composer, and it'll be just way off. And I always think about you when I think about like the kind of like the cultural side of where we come from.
Yeah.
It has to be very specific almost.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, this is. I'm guessing it's probably not as big of a stretch in his situation, but he was an Italian film composer who ended up working on a lot of Hollywood movies.
Right.
Never spoke any English.
Right.
And would directors or
Spaghetti
he would
westerns,
have like a translator or something like that when he
Mm-hmm.
would work on things like The Untouchables or whatever,
Yep,
right? But yeah, absolutely. I think he's a genius. He was one of our tragic pandemic. I shouldn't say pandemic losses. I don't think he died of COVID, but
No.
he was one of the people that we lost during the year 2020.
Before he died, and I'm sure you both know, he was set to play out here twice.
Oh,
Here at
yeah,
the Bow.
yeah.
Oh my god.
Twice.
Oh
Twice
my
he had
gosh.
dates scheduled. And I was like salivating. I was
Oh
like,
my gosh.
by all costs, I will have to, But Bao Nguyen actually took me to a tribute concert that his son conducted at the O2 in London a year or two back ago. For my birthday.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
It's so cool.
Yeah. It was just the most amazing.
I didn't know your love for soundtrack composers. Amazing. That's a music I grew up like. Most of my CDs back in the day were all soundtracks. That's why I appreciate music. I think when working 100 days, we have temp stuff. Like,
Yeah,
I just really love
some
music.
of
Was very important.
Morricone stuff, probably.
Yeah.
from what I understand, he worked out a lot of his music away from the piano. Like he didn't even need a piano to write.
the heck?
He would just sit at his desk and write
Like
all his stuff.
Beethoven.
Yeah, he's just like hearing it all in his head. He's like writing it down. I'm like,
Are you like that too?
no. I just honestly, my method of composing is just sit down in front of the piano and hope I get lucky that day.
Oh wow.
But
Yeah,
yeah,
Morricone
he's-
is definitely one of my all-time heroes creatively. Just the prolific amount, of work that he did, and it's all so different. All the films he did it felt so different, but you could still feel his musical signature in all the films and all the films that he did were like, the big ones like The Mission, Cinema Paradiso. It's just like iconic.
he worked on something like 400 movies or something like that. It's
insane,
It's crazy.
some insane amount.
Yeah. I think he might hold the record by now of the most amount of film music written by any one person. It's either him or Max Steiner. I don't know which one of them wrote more music, but
Who was the composer who just died in a plane crash just a few years back? Do you remember?
oh, you mean James Horner?
James Horner, yeah. James Horner.
That was about
Oh my
10,
God, it
10
was in a
years
plane
ago.
crash?
Yeah.
Oh
Yeah.
my
I have a
gosh.
crazy story about
I love
James
Glory.
Horner.
Oh, what?
It was a crazy story. I was in my family's business at the time. I was doing window coverings, and I was working on his house.
Uh-huh.
But he had two houses in Malibu. Like one was at the top, and then one's at the bottom. They're big houses. But I was working on the bottom house, which is he and his ex-wife at the time had split, and so I was working on this house, and we finished the job, and I was like texting the designer. I was like, "Hey, can we pick up the check?" And she's like, "Yeah, I'll get it tomorrow to you." And the next day, his plane went down.
Oh no!
Oh my
wow.
God, it's
Yeah,
crazy.
it was
Oh,
the most
jeez.
horrific. Yeah,
That's
like I
horrible.
was in
So
the house
weird.
working on, and then
Oh
we were gonna
my
go and work
God.
up the main house.
Yeah.
After we
my
were done with
gosh.
the wife's house.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was just such a tragic a story.
Yeah.
All right, we'll shift gears into the music.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, I know, but still. It's all music related, yeah.
Yeah. So tell me how this idea of the musical came about. I know you guys worked together on a few before, but how did this one in particular?
So, I had been getting an itch to write a musical again. It had been years and years and years and years. And I actually direct musicals for a middle school. So I've always been around theater, even though I haven't composed in it for a long time. And so this was in late 2019.
COVID, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah,
right
of course
around.
we didn't know it was going to happen back then, but I was I'll try not to make this story too long, but basically I got the kernel of an idea while I was at Knott's Berry Farm with my family, and there was this mural of like the whole Knott's story of how they went from like like an actual berry farm to selling chicken to building I was reading the mural. I'm like, this is a musical right here. This is an American Dream story. This is like Annie or something, Like
They started with berries, and then they decided, while they're doing berries, let's do chicken, fried chicken, and then let's put some entertainment. That's how Knott's Berry Farms grew. From berries to then fried chicken, right? Is
Yeah,
that how it
yeah.
was? And then
So it's
then
like
have
the-
amusement. Let's put some fun things you can do so people stick around and community building, and
So-
eat, and then
it was like the prototypical American Dream story. And then so I was like, but I don't, even though I think that is a musical and someone's going to write it someday, I don't want to do that. Like, how do I do the American Dream story, but with Asian characters?
Yeah.
Right.
And
Like,
there
how do you
hasn't
do
been
that?
a modern musical with centering Asian Americans, right? Going through. So then he just told me,
Mm-hmm.
hey, let's do a musical about the American dream. That was the kernel, right?
Yeah. So,
About the American
and
sense.
Waco and I have always kept, we worked on 100 Days, but, and then a short film after that. But,
Yeah, I mean,
but we always were good about meeting up once or twice a year and keeping in touch. And so we were having, we got together for breakfast and
And this is 2020. right?
January of 2020.
2020,
I was like,
breakfast.
hey, I want to write another musical, and you want to do this with me? I want to do like the American Dream, but with Asian American characters. That's all I've got. what do we do? You know? And then so we just started talking. I think we went out to breakfast 3 times, and
the third time's when they start shutting down.
The third time we went out to breakfast, we finally honed in on the idea, and we're like, I think we both like this. Why don't we do it? You know? And yeah, it was 3 days before the pandemic shut everything down.
Yeah. So it's kind of in a way a good time, because then they shut down, so it feels like Hollywood in a way was shut, like nothing was happening. Down, so this is the perfect timing to write, to create. I mean, it took a kind of going forward, writing the song, but it was really, really a great kind of a nice timing, I think, in actuality.
Yeah, I mean there was nothing to do but write. You know, I mean, and so we for several months in 2020, we would just have like a monthly Zoom meeting for an hour or two, and we'd just hash out conceptual ideas. Do you like this? Do you like that?
Yeah.
You know, and try to formulate a story. And what was really interesting is our audience, our Asian American audience listening to this podcast will probably remember 2020 was also that year. It felt like a kind of a collective realization of Asians in America, of kind of the complexity of the space that we occupy in this country, right? This is when people like, I think it was John Cho wrote an article in a magazine about the model minority problem. And Viet Nguyen also writing his Time magazine article, and there was just a lot of conversation, I think, that year about the complications, all the good and all the bad that we are involved in as Asians in the American social experience, right? And so those things, started to creep into the story that Weiko was writing, and we were very firm that we didn't want to write like a heavy. We didn't want.
Yeah, it's not about like
a heavy depressing.
Yeah, it's like not the typical is immigrant actually, but it's not about the challenges they face. They're finally reaching the family dynamic. It was we want to keep it a show that shows multi-dimensionality of the experience, and we don't want to make it too heavy, but it is. But I feel like the anti-Asian sentiment that's happening is because there was no understanding of what Asian diaspora is, right? What is that understanding? So it was a very conscious effort. Like our character comes from Hong Kong, right? It works at a hawker stand, which is like the food stand.
I was wondering why Hong Kong, because.
I think this is from Waco's background.
Well, because I wanted the English language to make sense when it's English language. I want to be like the Englishality. I didn't want to have to explain what we're speaking in Kent. You know what I mean? I wanted to. Hong Kong's very English, is very fluid.
Got it.
And Henry Chang, who I kind of not modeled him, but he is the American dream. This director I'm talking about. I mean, he won an Emmy for editing The Cosby Show back in the day. Like, it's phenomenal. Like, I told Henry, like after our show, you were the American dream. Like you were an immigrant from Hong Kong, came when he was 18 years old. And I kind of like, that was kind of the set of it, right? And Hong Kong obviously is known, I mean, every country is known for food, but Hong Kong,
especially,
it's special, it's Michelin, all that kind of stuff. And, in our cultural, in American, right? You go to any small town in America, there's a Chinese restaurant somewhere. Like in a town of 280 people, there'll be one restaurant, you'll be a Chinese restaurant. So I feel like, and also Asian celebrity chefs. Like Asian celebrity chef, that's a thing, right? And cooking competitions. So we knew want to put it as something that's in the cusp of American culture and relatability from there, and then starting building from that. So that's why I thought from Hong Kong, coming to America, we have to deal with the language, kind of like water speaking, all that kind of stuff, going through.
Sense.
Yeah, and we made a very conscious effort. It's not going to be all, oh, look at this struggle. Oh, this show's not about the struggle of achieving, in a typical movie, right? Rocky at the end, about Apollo Creed. Like halfway through the show, he's a celebrity. He's the Gordon Ramsay at the end of Act 1. And now we talk about just anyone relatable. What does fame do to you? What does that hunger for American acceptance do to you? Going through, and how do you? And then as his partnership with his kind of empire falls apart, the marriage falls apart. how do you go back to your roots, right? We're all about our roots, our ancestry, or where we come from. So that's the heart of the show. So it's very family friendly.
Yeah.
It's, it's like we want to make sure it's not like so. It's not a. It has a social. There's something to say about social, but it's not. We're not preaching.
No, it is. I mean, the show is
entertaining.
the show is definitely, it's an entertaining, fun ride. Big, it has a happy ending. Hopefully you go home humming some of the songs. We wanted to give people a big, huge, fun time in the theater, but also, I think since we started writing it in 2020 and with those things that we mentioned, we also wanted it to, beyond that, have important things to say about our experience without it being like this heavy-handed kind of thing, and I think that what's interesting is that Waiko and I just kind of, I don't know that we set out to do this, but for me at least, this has become the most personal project that I've worked on. And because a lot of those early conversations on Zoom were just kind of like, oh, when you used to get in trouble as a kid, like, what did your mom do?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, well, what did your mom? Oh yeah, okay. And it's like, what did your dad say when you did this? We would just like talk about what it was like growing up Chinese American, and I think that maybe that's why people responded so well to the concert. They just felt that it was very honest, I guess.
It's crazy you say that, because yes, it was honest, and yes, the story was good, but damn, the singing, the music really confused me, because it was just like, well, on one hand, I got to pay attention to the words and messaging, but at the other end of it, it's me being swept away by the performance and the musicality of the whole thing. It was great. I'm not complaining. I'm just saying, like, a lot of the times I was not even thinking about the story, because I was so swept up by the performances.
Wait till you see it with the story.
with the dialogue, and we were so thrilled. Like, it's basically more than what we had expected, because it's music stands, right? It's 8 performers in front of music stands, and there's no real hard context about the storyline. But for the most part, I felt like it resonated. It connected emotionally with the audience, and it was like 200 people and filling the capacity. And then you remember, if you remember the audience, it was all different ages, different ethnicities, and that's community, but come together as a new musical, which it was exactly, the audience makeup was beyond than what I have hoped for, right? Because this show is about, it's not an Asian American kind of secluded context, which is great. I mean, you have Asian American stories that's just about the Asian American. My kind of take on a story, and I think Chris also was in alignment, was this: I love to tell Asian American stories, but it's about Asians within the context of America. Yeah. If that makes sense. Like, for me, that's how we can connect. We can foster more understanding, right? And how the intersection work.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah. So, but without preaching it on the head. Hey, look, we're intersecting, but just more like, hey, we all have dreams. What's commonality? We all have dreams. The American dream. For every kind of immigrant. What is that bond?
One of the very kind of simple and very straightforward things that Waiko said to me early in the process, I think this might have been either in 2020 or in 2021, that has always stuck in my head, was you said, "This is not an immigrant story. This is an American story." Right? And that, I think that just clarified in that moment a lot of the things that we were trying to do as we were developing the material. And, I just to go back to, we were very fortunate to have the audience that we did. And even more so, the cast that we ended up with was phenomenal, and the creative team also. I remember when I think I first started showing Jenny Chenglei, the
producer of
our producer,
producer.
I showed her a couple of songs in like about 2 years ago, I think.
Oh wow!
And that was the first time I mentioned to her that we were developing this project. And then, she and Henry officially came on board to help us several months ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I just remember thinking to myself, I remember I went home and I talked to my wife. I was like, wow, I've got Jenny and Henry on this now. Right? Like, okay. Like, okay.
It's not Waiko
It's
just kind
like, I
of
know.
directing
It's
this.
like,
It's not Waiko. Like, oh, it's gonna put it together
so-
like back in a student.
okay,
days.
we got big guns on this now, right?
Yeah.
And then we got such a talented cast for like the first time putting this thing on, right? And at first, there were times where I was feeling overwhelmed. I was just like, how did we get all these people, right? Just because I said I wanted to write a musical. And then I don't know. I think it just all goes back to, I think that for whatever it's worth, the time that Waiko and I spent putting this material together, it must have spoken to the people that wanted to be a part of it,
My mom, when we left, she goes, "How much did you pay for the show?" Like, she asked me, like, "How much I paid for the ticket?" And I was like, "No, this was not a paid situation." She goes, "What do you mean?" She felt like it was like a fully produced. She's never been in a musical.
Oh my
But
gosh.
she's like, "How could they put on something like this with that kind of quality?"
Oh,
Yeah, she's like, "I feel so bad for everybody there. They could have made so much money."
so much very.
Well, tell her to come back once we're in the Pantages.
But there's no production, we didn't put the set together. So
Yeah.
it was very special because it was the first time the songs
Came
to
life.
to the audience, the first
Yeah.
audience, and that I think we'll always remember. I think we'll have many audiences in the future, but I don't think we'll ever forget this first audience.
Yeah,
Like,
it's always special.
yeah, and then at the end when we talked about, not because oh my god, a standing ovation that we had, it was we've been in enough shows we know what obligatory standing ovation is, because it wasn't like a bunch of people. I mean, they're friends and family and family and friends. It's kind of this, invited audience only, and we just felt like we ended the show with a kind of a monologue. It wasn't like a big number like you typically end a big musical with. It was and that's kind of been our signature. We end all of our musicals with this soft number, like it's very I don't know,
kind of a
heartfelt.
heartfelt,
heartfelt, profound kind of moment.
yeah, and it was amazing. Like, and people just like, I felt like, and it's like a slow rise of the ovation. So it felt like it was like they digested that
Authentic,
emotion, and then it stood. And it was just, it was, it's been one of the biggest creative joys. I was telling people, like, I've had it in a long time. As a screenwriter, things in development for a long time. But seeing this come to life, it was very creatively rewarding. Yeah.
So we know how difficult films are to make money, but let's be even more.
Theater's even
God.
harder, right?
Let's go even harder.
Yeah.
Musicals are probably 100 times, and films are hard to make back your money now.
Yeah.
The economics of a musical is intense.
Yeah.
So what does that all look like, if you don't mind sharing that with us?
Well, I think we're still navigating that.
Yes.
That's the funny thing is that's Waiko and I and Jenny and Henry, we're all movie people, right? So we're, I think we're, even though that experience obviously is worth a lot, but I think we're kind of learning the terrain, and but when I decided I wanted to do this, and I decided that I wanted to drag Waiko into it also, is it was one of those things that I actually see happen to artists that are our age now, since we're no longer these young guys, right? Is sometimes there's just a project that you have to do, and it obviously we would love for this to be profitable someday, and that's our goal. But it wasn't the reason that I felt like I felt like I needed to do it as an artist.
Wow.
I just it was the thing that I hadn't done yet that needed to get done, right? And so the fact that we even wrote this thing already feels was successful to me.
Yeah.
On that
Wow.
level.
Just having that concert, that was like we felt we accomplished.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
that's-
now it's about like, how far can we get it now? And hopefully there will be ramifications where everyone can make money off of it someday. But it's I think because of what you said, that it's so hard to make money off of theater. If I was going to do this with the reason being that I wanted to make money off of it, I wouldn't have succeeded.
Yeah.
I would have given up, I had to do it as an artist.
And maybe that's where some of the best art comes from, is when the artists don't give a rat's about the actual economics of it, and they just create because they just have that burning desire, and the muse calls them and they have to go for it.
But also at the same time, we're very conscious about audience too, right? We want to make sure like this show is not just like doing art for art's sake, but art for like there's an audience for it.
Yeah.
And we feel confident there's an audience for it. Now it's a matter of just like this is the start. It's musical is a very long journey, like years. But it's basically then we have this workshop performance, and the next one, then I'll bring in more potential collaborators, partners, people to as we wrap up the team, because it takes a whole village to make a movie. It takes a bigger, city to make a musical, right? Going forward, but obviously now we're intentional. We have a goal. It's not just like back then in college, at UCLA, it was just like, let's do a show, right? Oh, great, the next one, But this is like, how can we take this as far as, because then it's about representations, about that story being out there, not just here, but it's about community, going forward.
And that was one of the things I told Waco back in 2020 when we were first meeting. I was like, when can you, Broadway hasn't put anything like this on a New York stage,
right?
It's like, and that's actually something that I still tell people is like, well, we were talking about at the beginning of this podcast, how wonderful it is that we've been making progress in Hollywood, right? We have all these things like Beef,
right,
and all the different Asian shows that are on these days. But if you look at Broadway, like musicals, we don't have Crazy Rich Asians. We don't have all those different shows, American Born Chinese. We don't have all these, what Hollywood is doing. I felt like Broadway is like behind in terms of representation now. And so I told Waco is like, there's a market gap.
Yeah.
Like I guarantee you there's a hungry audience for something like this, right?
Literally, right?
So,
it's about food.
There you go. Pun intended. So
and it makes sense. The food, right? You're a restaurateur.
Yes,
I mean, think about that, right? So I think that musical speaks to you a whole different level.
Connected,
connected, and you think about hawker stands in Asia, right? Or food stands, food trucks. Right?
Yeah, I mean, I was 12 years in that 626 night market game. Yeah, I was in the food
there
stalls
you go,
for 12 years.
Right? And then what is the, dream? Look at the Roy Choi, from the big phenomenal, but then we push it. Like, what if this went all the way to the Gordon Ramsay world? Which, I mean, he did, obviously, it was a restaurant in Vegas, but what if we just went all the way? Like The Greatest Showman, The greatest, hitting through that.
I think that's, that the thing about the hawker stand and the food trucks in our story, it's that's like a great example of kind of the tone of the show that we've been trying to set, is that we've discovered that a lot of people in the audience really liked that Trucks and Ducks and Tacos song. It's just it's funny, and it's just a fun number that makes you giggle, and it's a little catchy and everything like that. Which is what we want the audience to feel. But then if you really think about it and dissect it, this is part of the experience of being Asian American for many people, especially if they come from the immigrant generation or one generation removed from that. Because what a lot of immigrants try to do is when they leave their home country and they miss aspects of it, but they can never really have it in their new country, they try to approximate it.
Yeah.
Right? To make something that feels like it reminds them of home, right? And that to Jackie, that's what the food truck is, because it reminds him of the hawker stand that his father ran, right? And so there's those things in there like that in our show that I hope that people with that experience will feel like, oh, that's speaking to me, even though the song is just supposed to be fun. You know?
Yeah.
And, you know, the American dream is always like, okay, you have nothing, you just do it all. Like, you know, you start with nothing. And all, you know, the American thing is about you do it without any help. Wow, you just solo it. You're the capital. You just go all the way. But, you know, in the Asian culture, we're here because of the ancestries that came before. And that was a very important intentional thing because it goes back to the dad. It goes back to the history. It goes back to your roots. Like, you are who you are because of your parents. And their parents, right? The ancestral worship that we have. So that was very important. So we talk about those things where it operates on two different levels. The American dream, but the subtle things of that
the layers of it.
The layers of we're here because of those before us, right?
Yeah.
And that's important. That's a thing the Asian audience are absolutely going to connect with on a different level. Yeah.
So is there a website that the audience can, track this progress?
Or IG page?
Yeah,
right?
Rise to the Top musical.
Rise to the Top musical.
Rise to the Top musical, IG. We're just kind of, we're just still, because, songs may change. We don't want to be like, oh, this is it, because things are evolving. Songs are changing. And, going back to Chris, you mentioned like we're all movie people doing this musical. It feels like, oh my God, we're always like outsiders coming in. But, we're also very lucky to be working with a theater agent on the show who represents me on the theater side. And we just newly started working together from UTA. And she said this thing really great because I was like, oh, musical, I'm going to need a lot of help because this is not I don't know that well, I'm film first. And she said this really cool thing. It really makes me feel like good. Like I don't feel like an outsider kind of trying to do musical. It's like, oh, it's a musical. It's your second language. I love that.
Wow.
I love that. Sometimes I feel like, okay, your lane's like, but we're storytellers. It's just a different medium of telling a story, right? I love the fact that, it's just your second language. That's all.
But
I love that.
I don't see a separation with what you do and what you do. You guys came together to produce a baby.
Yeah,
that is like
absolutely. And this
very appropriate.
Yeah, and this collaboration has been really great because the evolution of our partnership.
Yeah.
So the first musical, I wrote the script, I wrote the lyrics of the songs already. I go, hey Chris, can you just put music to this? like it's almost like the film way.
Film scoring.
It's like the movie way, right?
Yeah.
I was like, hey, put music, late track. Our second musical, more like I had the script kind of pretty much decently like laid out outline. I go, okay,
it was similar
in a
to
song,
what we,
but then we had a conversation about song placements. Like, oh, this song would be like, we had a conversation and we did a lot more songs. So that was like that collaboration. And then this time was really great because so I usually do the book and lyrics for the two musicals, and then this one is like he does lyrics and music. So he has great ideas for lyrics and stuff. And then so it's really a true from the American dream coming together. We talked about characters, like all from this kind of music point of view, from the character development, the story. So I think that's why it feels very cohesive.
Yeah.
Because our partnership really came from the very beginning together, and sharing lyrics work, and then he does music, I do book, is really the perfect collaboration.
That's really why I wanted to do this. And it's, as Waiko kind of touched on, that's one of the differences between film scoring and writing a musical is that in film scoring, they actually, for those in the audience that don't know the film process, the music comes almost at the very end. Right. So they make the whole film, they edit it together, and music is one of the last things to go on to the film. Right. And then in a musical, ideally, and like the way we're doing it right now, the composer is there before a single word has been written. Right. And so I've affected the story in ways where I would never get to do that on a film, right? And Waiko's affected the music in our musical in ways that he would never be able to affect a film score. Like a ton of the stylistic choices in the music were actually there because of Waiko. Things like the canto pop, right?
Right.
So
one of the
Waiko,
music, the songs from the dad has that Chinese canto pop feel to it.
And the funny thing is, I didn't grow up with that music, but Waiko did.
Yeah.
Right. And so he was like, oh, let's have, certain moments in the Hong Kong sequence or representing the father. Could we have that be influenced by canto pop? I'm like, well, give me a playlist of your favorite songs and I'll study them because I don't know that stuff, right? And so I learned that stuff so I could get it in there. And then, and Waiko was the one that had the idea of getting the K-pop number in there.
Yeah.
Right? I'm like, okay, I don't know how to do that either, but let me see if I can learn it, right? And I'm like, where in the story would you put something like that? And then it dawned on me, okay, you always do something silly at the beginning of Act 2.
Right.
So that's where we're gonna put it. And then I have a friend who is like super into BTS, Virginia, in case you're watching this. But so I used her for research. I'm like, give me all your favorite BTS songs, right? And I just started listening to them. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, I think I get how this stuff goes now. And so all of those musical stylistic choices would not even be there if it hadn't been for Waco's suggestions.
So the impact going through.
Yeah, so it's, on some level, he's influencing the music on a level far beyond what he would get to do as a film director.
Right.
And I'm influencing the story in ways I would never get to do as a film composer.
Yeah.
Which is what I think is so fun about musical theater. It's a difference, the way of putting this together is a different process than what you do on film.
And music, now with the streaming, where so many saturation of content, right, that's on there. You know how people look at Taylor Swift, concerts. It's about the live music experience, right? I'm not sure what the Broadway situation is right now, but I feel like this is people are going to go to storytelling live, with music and entertainment. So I think it's actually, it seems like it's such a long journey, and which it is, but I think people are going to be hungering for live entertainment.
Yeah, I do too.
Well, I thank both of you for opening up and sharing so much. Obviously, there are things that we could go on forever and ever and ever about. But I hope that, this is sort of like the seed today that you guys planted not only in your own lives, but in the community. Obviously this is the Vietnamese podcast, but you guys have a lot to do with, the music and, the relationships in our world. And I hope to see in a few months or years, the actual production, and we can come back and we can talk about an exciting opening on Broadway or wherever you guys decide to
in 2 years. Not a problem. That's a good deadline. Thank you.
We'll do it.
2 years.
We'll be
no
there.
pressure.
At the Pantages. Chris Wong, thank you. Weiko Lin, thank you both for coming on the show.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having
Thanks,
us.
Ken.